We're going to kick off our final session by bringing it up another notch. We haven't done lightning talks since ATT&CKcon 2.0 in 2019. So brief reminder how we run them here at ATT&CKcon. We have 8 speakers coming up in the next 40 minutes. They're going to be going one after another, no Q&A. Jamie's not going to come up here with his great questions from the audience and himself. Just going to be going from speaker to speaker. I'm going to actually be timing them from here on stage, and we'll be cutting them off right at 5 minutes. So without further ado, ready to kick off our first lightning talk speaker, Brian Donahue.
Woo! All right, my name is Brian Donahue. You all might remember me from such ATT&CKcons as the last one, and the one before that, and also the one before that. But today, I'm here to speak to you on behalf of a bipartisan coalition of nearly half dozen security professionals. Quishing is a pernicious, dangerous threat, and some people in this room, whose names I won't mention, have been very reluctant to add it to attack. These are serious people here at MITRE. They do serious work. They probably have security clearances or something. So we get it. Quishing is very silly. It is 100% beneath their dignity to even mention it in attack at all. But bad guys don't follow our rules of decorum, and it is time to take this threat seriously. Quishing is a portmanteau. It is a mix between the words QR code, like that thing right there, and phishing with a PH. A portmanteau is where you take 2 words that are unrelated, you smush them together, you create one word with one distinct meaning. So sort of like bromance or froyo or even labradoodle. In June of 2022, several individuals who would later become members of our anti-quishing coalition were working a conference in San Diego. We were promoting an open source tool. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called Atomic Red Team. We were using a QR code to drive attendees to a registration page where they could sign up for a newsletter. Predictably, and much to our collective shame, they were very skeptical of this QR code. We formally submitted quishing as a sub-technique of phishing to MITRE ATT&CK right then and there. We did this partly out of penance. We also did this because we feared that we weren't clever enough to ever come up with an actual novel technique, but we wanted our names in attack. But we did this mostly because we wanted to forever be enshrined in GitHub's Arctic Code Vault thing as the party animals who had submitted quishing to MITRE ATT&CK. We wrote a thoughtful, detailed, and utterly serious submission, including public references, to the attack team, and they laughed at us. In fairness, we laughed too, but we weren't done, and neither were the bad guys. In the intervening months between then and now, we've stayed in contact with the attack team, keeping them informed about in-the-wild instances of quishing. Some thanks are due to our contacts at ATT&CK for continuing to read our emails. We do appreciate you. But people are using QR codes for everything. They're in restaurants, they're in advertisements. We use them for payments and authentication. They set the seeds for 2-factor authentication. They are used to link us to other people's Venmo accounts, and they perform cross-device authentication. So we're not suggesting that any of these things are bad, but they reveal an increasing familiarity with QR codes. And also a comfort with using QR codes for things that have a real nexus to security, things like, as I said, authentication and payments. So this comfort presents an opportunity that adversaries are already seizing. So we know for a fact that security analysts and threat hunters and incident responders are all investigating quishes. Sorry for using that word. And adversaries are very quickly learning that valid accounts and identities are the best way to implant themselves in organizations and cause harm. Quishing will be a critically important technique in the toolkit of adversaries who are targeting accounts and identities in the coming years. We're taking this so seriously, in fact, that we did what any right-minded security coalition would do when they encounter a concerning threat. We commissioned the creation of a mascot named Quishy. You can meet him by following this QR code right here. So our esteemed editor, she asked me, is Quishy good or bad? I don't get it. And it's not about Quishy. Quishy has no agency, okay? It's about where Quishy takes us, all right? And if we're not careful, Quishy could take us down a truly ominous road. So now it's your turn, Miter, to add quishing to attack as a sub-technique of phishing in the enterprise matrix. We won't be taking any questions from media at this time. Thank you.
Hey, to Jamie. Oh. So some very strong words from Brian to start us off today. Next up, we're going to have Jose Barajas.
Hello? Is this thing on? Okay, yeah. All right. So hi, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about the work that I've been doing with LLMs. I'm sure that you've heard large language models ever since OpenAI released ChatGPT. They've been highly used across everyone from us in technology to even non-technical users. So today I just wanted to share the ways that we've been leveraging it at Attack IQ. And before I get into that though, in the use cases, I wanted to give you a sense of what we did to put these things together. First of all, we do a lot of threat-based items. So we're taking threat feeds and including that in our corpus of data. We have an entire set of confluence information. We've included some of that. And of course, we've done a ton of projects with MITRE, and MITRE has a nice data set as well. I've included that into what's called a vector database, which then becomes the brain for our LLM. And some of the use cases that we've done, first and foremost, was summarization. This sounds very, very simple, but it's super useful from the perspective of, first and foremost, as we have a number of thread feeds coming in, we can have things quickly summarized for us so that we can understand the bigger picture. From there, depending on the questions you ask, it's going to be the answers that you get. So we can start to extract certain information like TTPs correlated back to MITRE are done very well and very nicely. If we're trying to understand at the procedural level, the exact commands that are getting executed, we've been able to do some interesting extractions around that. And the thing that I've found most interesting is the way that it does a really good job of summarizing information to even non-technical folks. So for example, I was able to get it to explain why oil rig was important to my niece that's in the 6th grade, right? And then she was shocked about the kind of stuff that I did after that. So that's an example. Another one, very good way for you to take context that's highly technical and then translate that to your CISO, translate that to the board. Right? It's very, very good at doing some of that stuff. So that's one of the first use cases that we found very useful from that perspective. The second one is going to be around development. This technology understands Python. It understands Terraform. I hardly write code myself directly. I just have it write it for me and then clean it up a little bit as well. This also means that it's extremely good at writing things like Sigma rules. And while it's not going to get it right the first time, however, it is going to give you a good working model to start with. So we've been very successful at writing Sigma rules, correlation rules, having to write KQL or Elasticsearch queries on our behalf. And then even if it doesn't get it right the first time, just work with it, give it some feedback. It's actually very good at understanding like, hey, you're giving me a static name. I need you to make that a way that's not as static, right? Because attackers aren't going to use mimikatz.exe every time. So those are the ways that we've been able to work with it to develop things from that perspective. And then finally, this has been my favorite one, is around internal support. I mentioned that for our case, we have Confluence as part of the details and information that we've included as part of the brain of our LLM. And what that's put us in a position to do is instead of having that typical back and forth you have on Slack, you know, someone giving an answer and you're like, I'm not quite sure if that's exactly how it still is, but that's how I recall it. The LLM can actually go ahead and grab the context, answer the question, probably just as good as any of the other users internally have, but then it actually gives you the resources and context that it used to derive at that answer. So that's very useful because I don't know about you guys, but I find that all the time people give me an answer. I don't remember where that's documented. I don't remember what that is. The LLM gives you the answer and actually provides you exactly what resources it used in order to answer that. So for myself, as I'm onboarding new analysts, as I'm hiring new sales engineers that work for me directly, it becomes a great resource for them to learn, not only to get the answers directly as they're working, but then specifically get the resources they can deep dive and better understand. So I think from that perspective, as you guys build a corpus of data around what you do day to day, it's going to be a great way for your team to start to learn from this information. And as I've gone to conferences, for example, Pinecone conference in San Francisco, a lot of companies are actually reducing their support caseload by 20% by using those LLMs. So definitely a very good use case for you guys to develop your own corpus of data, use it as part of your day-to-day workflow, but really supporting your new analysts that you're onboarding. I found it to be a great resource for them to learn and get up to speed very quickly that otherwise wouldn't happen. That's all I had to share. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jose. And so next up, we have Stephen Johnson and Emma McMullen.
Hello, everybody. All right. That's, yeah, you can guess probably. So nice to see you all, see so many familiar faces. You may remember me from MITRE ATT&CKcon OG, as well as a previous lightning talk. I run the Cyber Fusion team at my organization, which essentially just sounds very buzzwordy, but really what that is tactical intel.
And my name is Steve Johnson. I've been working in cloud for about 15 years now, various cloud providers, and that's my job right now too, is cloud security. So we come from different backgrounds, different current jobs, different responsibilities, but we're both in cyber. So if you're in an organization like that, where you have maybe a large organization or several different teams, you know that the teams have separate use cases, right? They have separate data requirements, separate responsibilities as far as reporting. But chances are they also have overlapping data domains. So things like threats, controls, incidents, security objectives, intelligence organizations and how that's managed. These are all things that overlap with each other in different teams, but they may not have the same definition, right? So if you're at a place, for example, where you really want to fuse this data together and maybe get something greater than the sum of its parts, you have to figure out how to do that, which is not a trivial exercise.
Yeah, so we're all here for ATT&CKcon. I think we've all been in the situation where somebody probably higher up in your org's like, hey, can you make a heat map out of that? And can you then automate it and make a really pretty color scheme for the board, that kind of thing? I think we've all been there. And we were finding that actually not only were we both there for different use cases, but like 5 other teams were as well. So as we were looking at the core, what types of questions were being asked to prove with different types of data sets, we found that there was an opportunity to find a common language amongst all of us so we can work smarter, not harder to solve those problems. So at the risk level, you know, some of those questions might be, are our risks effective? Are our controls effective? How do we update those in real time so you're not just waiting for the once a quarter, once a year assessment on whether or not a control is working properly? And more at my level around like the tactical and incident response space, we had a large scale effort to fully automate heat map analysis. It's basically 3 Python scripts and a trench coat, but it works. And essentially at the end of the day, what that was getting us was real-time data showing us how that heat map was going up or down based on whether or not our detections were working or not. And so that led us to thinking about how we can use MITRE ATT&CK as that common language, but now with the added value of MITRE DEFEND and obviously Attack Navigator, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with. The nice thing about Attack Navigator, right, is that it spits things out in JSON files, and you can do different types of metadata, different types of attributes, different scoring models. So even though we're all speaking different languages with different data types, as long as you can get a number and at some level align it to either MITRE ATT&CK at that tactical level down at the bottom, or MITRE DEFEND more in that mid-level, that translation layer between your risks and controls, you can get a pretty well-functioning model. And then maybe your 3 Python scripts and a trench coat can become something that's a legit tool. And that's where architecture comes in.
Right. So if you take a look at this stack over on the right, the vertical stack, like Emma was saying, that represents sort of the immediacy of the data, where you can think of the risks as sort of the high level, abstract, sort of bureaucratic end of the data spectrum, where tactical at the bottom there is immediate, real-time incident type data, right? And the objective is to try to get things pushed toward the bottom of that, right? Like to have real time as your objective. There's also some other ways to categorize the data in terms of factuality and derived data. For example, when I say factuality, I mean things that reflect things in the real world at a quantifiable level, right? Like how many attacks, what attacks were used, what libraries, what code, those sort of things, as opposed to something like a heat map score, right? Like what's orange, what's red, what's yellow, on your heat map. So as you're looking at these different types of data and trying to find definitions for them, it's also good to categorize them by immediacy and also factualness. And that's about it for us.
Thank you, Jace. Thank you, Stephen and Emma. Right on time. Next up, we have Jason Kirsten.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Kierstead. I'm the Vice President of Collective Threat Defense at Cyware. Here to talk today a little bit about challenges with attack mapping and using it in both software and in the data that you see. Both here at Cyware and in my previous role at IBM Security, I had a lot of experience with having to consume threat intelligence data and figure out how to leverage it inside cybersecurity products. And one of the things that I see quite often is MITRE provides this very robust sticks encoded data set for attack. It's the reference implementation of attacks itself is all implemented in sticks. They handily provide it in both sticks 2.0 and 2.1 format. We've seen over the past 2 days a number of presentations where folks have kind of walked you through this and how powerful it is and easy to leverage in your threat intelligence programs. But one of the things that's missing with both of those is how to reference the actual sticks objects themselves inside of your threat intelligence. So one of the things that you may or may not be familiar with about sticks is there's a number of different ways that objects can be related. You can create relationships which tie objects together. You can create what are called external references, where you say, I want to add an external reference and give a web URL or a web link or a link to a third-party identification system like CVE. You can also do what are called embedded relationships, where you have essentially identifiers that are linked inside the object itself. And because there is no best practice provided by MITRE nor from the OASIS CTITC on how folks should use attack in their data, folks do a huge mishmash of all of the different things I described and more. So when you're actually looking at threat intelligence data, you may have that data referencing an attack technique with T1258. You may have it say external reference and then point to the MITRE attack website. You may have it point to the sticks object, and if it's pointing to the sticks object, you might have any number of different ways to express that relationship. And the challenge with that as consumers is because everyone in the community is doing it different ways, it makes it really hard to integrate with tools. So one of the things that I'd like to see happen is a best practice be developed for how attack should be referenced inside other threat intelligence. And that could be provided by MITRE. Maybe it's a project that goes under the Center for Threat Informed Defense. Maybe it's something the OASIS CTITC needs to take on, but somebody needs to do this because standards don't work when everyone uses standards in a different way. The one thing that I'll add just before my time runs out related to that is another big pain point is around attack versioning. So we all know that attack has a release cadence. MITRE versions it several times a year, provides all the latest TTP information as part of that version. But when you actually go and use a cybersecurity product, how often does that product tell you which attack version it's even talking about? I can tell you it's next to never. And the problem with not actually referring to the version of attack inside the product and inside the data set, when you lose that fidelity, you actually can very easily lose track and get out of sync because MITRE occasionally moves things from one technique to another. And it can create a lot of danger in your data. So if you're a cybersecurity company here in this room and you have any control over your products, if you're a threat intelligence provider and you're providing threat intelligence feeds, I'd highly recommend in both these situations for you to start referencing the MITRE ATT&CK version, not just the technique ID, because it's frankly not enough for high fidelity information.
Yep.
That's it.
Thank you, Jason. Next up, we have Benjamin Langr.
Give the clicker. Okay. Just in case. Right. Cool. There we go. So, hello everyone. My name is Ben Langr. I currently work as a principal engineer for the Ultimate Knowledge Institute, doing cybersecurity training. Of note, if you love to build cyber ranges, please connect with me. I'm always looking for a couple good people on that. This talk is a little more related to other work I do. Previously worked in detection strategy, and out of that kind of came up with some of the ideas that you'll see here I'm proposing as adjectives for attack. So the basic idea is, I love that MITRE ATT&CK has this vocabulary in terms of nouns to say what something is. Where I feel like it's coming up, or where there's a lack, is in the area of how did something happen. So if you tell me that a threat actor used OS credential dumping, there could be a lot of different ways that happened. Did they use Meterpreter to do that, something in there? Did they compile Mimikatz, or did they use some other custom tool? Just on that surface level, we don't know, and each of those three has very different implications for detection. And so out of that, I wanted to kind of propose these standardized languages, which you've probably heard some of the things even in the talks yesterday and today. People using terms like sophisticated or advanced, or maybe in some cases like a basic level. And so with that in mind, here's my proposal. I've used this in a couple of other projects. 3 levels. So public, altered, and bespoke. So public would be techniques that exist, or say implementations of techniques that exist in common, readily available toolkits. So think GitHub POCs, Kali Linux built-in things. Altered would be some modification to that, presumably to evade a defense or detection, but still fundamentally the same technique. And then finally, bespoke would be that APT level where we're building something novel. It could be a new, like a new sub-technique or an entirely new technique altogether. And so out of this, it kind of lets me understand, you're probably thinking, well, the detection implications are very different for that. And yes, they are. Public techniques can be pretty easily detected with a signature, right? It can signature a file or some kind of IOC in it. Altered technique, if you think about the pyramid of pain, this would be something where maybe you're doing a more general detection focused on different variations on that public technique. Bespoke, if you're trying to prevent that, it's going to require a lot more environment baselining. You have to look at what's different. And so this kind of language lets us say, not only do we have coverage for a technique, we have coverage for the type of technique. If you're thinking about like a matrix where everything's, your attack matrix is green, we have detections for everything. Well, if your threat model includes an advanced actor that's known to use bespoke techniques, you maybe want to think about, are they truly all green against that threat actor? So here's kind of a more concrete example just to kind of connect it more. So if we're talking about web shells, there's a technique for that. A public version of a web shell would be something from user share web shells on Kali Linux. You can go look at that right now. Those work, but if you try to deploy them on any kind of system with EDR solution or antivirus, you'll immediately get caught. Altered would be, say, a modified version of one of those. Example here, I taught a class a couple years ago where we modified this command ASP web shell to evade Windows Defender signatures. It was altered. It still fundamentally worked the same way, but it evaded the signature. And then finally, a bespoke version would be a novel web shell that matches a target's web environment specifically. And so that's kind of the proposal, and I would encourage people to start thinking in terms of this for like threat reporting of what is something when you're writing up a technique. And one of the things to note is obviously something that you do a write-up of bespoke technique suddenly now becomes public realm. So it also matters to think about the adversary intent and at the time when it was detected, which of these operational intents did it cover. And so with that's everything I just wanted to cover today. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at LangrSec and talk about different measuring of threat actors and what you can do with that kind of thing. So thank you all.
Thank you. Pass this to you. Thank you, Ben. Next up, we're going to have Andrew Malone. And from G.
Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew Malone. I'm a security engineer working for JetBlue. And today I'm here to socialize the idea that including the context of the business and the lenses of risk can help make enterprise mapping more meaningful. Now, recently my bosses have given me the task of making a enterprise detective / preventative catalog for all the security tools that we have in the environment. And shockingly, to none of you at the United ATT&CKcon, I've decided to use the tag. Oh, has it been off the whole time?
Yes.
That's unfortunate. Okay. Well,
We can restart the timer.
well, it's good to know I have the first few sentences down, so that's good. Well, hello there, and hello everybody online who just saw me talk for a second. My name is Andrew Malone. I'm a security engineer working for JetBlue, and today I'm here to socialize the idea that including the context of business and the lenses of risk can help make enterprise mappings more meaningful. Now, recently my bosses have given me the task of making a enterprise detective / preventative catalog for all the tools in my environment. And shockingly to none of you at the MITRE ATT&CKcon, I've decided to use ATT&CK as a framework to kind of go about doing so. Now, in my research of looking at how people have done kind of tool mappings for detection and prevention before, I've noticed that it can be a bit black and white. I either do have coverage or I don't have coverage, and maybe I've got like a 1 to 5 score or something. And this is good. I can see the gaps that are in my environment. I can see which tools are helping me out where. However, I think it's important to keep in mind the end goal of what we're doing when actually trying to close the gaps. And to me, that end goal is not to make as many of these boxes green as possible. It's to make the boxes green that the business actually cares about. And as a detection engineer myself, and that being how I spend most of my time, there are hundreds of ideas for detections that I could be writing on any given day. But between vendor meetings, stuff popping up, wanting to eat lunch, and everything in between, I probably have time to maybe make one of them. So given these constrictions and the gaps that we will have in our environments, I think it's important that we need to include the context of the business and the risk. And I think we can do that through lenses. And what I mean by lenses are things like risk levels for certain environments. Now, let's say you're a hybrid deployment with part of your business in the cloud and part of your business on-prem, but the part of the business in the cloud is really everything that's running the user interaction, is driving everything, bringing in revenue, operations, and your on-prem is a bit more ancillary. If that's the case, you're carrying a higher level of risk with the cloud part of your network, and the attack matrix, if you have any gaps there, should reflect that as well. There's also threat intel for industry TTPs. If we know of 5 actors that are known to target the aviation industry and they use a set of 15, 25 techniques, then if we have a gap on any of those techniques, that needs to scream off the page compared to any of the other gaps we have that are not targeted. I actually think the most important one up here is organizational priorities, what your business actually cares about. So I work for an airline, and we care about safety, operations, and dollars in that order. For us, confidentiality is of a lower risk than integrity and availability. Understanding kind of where your business falls on that scale can help you emphasize certain parts of the attack matrix, and again, help with that prioritization. There's also the odds that TTPs actually work in your environment. If you're a 95% Windows shop and a 5% Linux shop, chances are you want to care about the 95% of Windows devices a bit more, unless the 5% of Linux devices is the 5% that runs everything to do with safety for my crew members and customers. If that's the case, that 5% of devices just became the most important part on my network, and any gaps in that environment should be treated as such. So what I think all of these lenses are kind of poking at is that no real world business is monolithic. Again, we all have gaps in our environment and limited resources to go out and close them. So being able to include this context and include this risk can really help with how we're going to prioritize. And if you're not sure where to start, I think these are a few decent places. Talk to your BCDR team about what they spend the most time actually trying to recover. What does your IT team spend the most money to actually go through and back up? Are there any app systems and environments which are a priority 1 in incident response? And then my favorite example, which my boss gave me, is what breaking would actually make the CEO get out of bed? I think each of these are poking at kind of what is truly important to the business. And if you can tie that back to your attack mapping, I think it really helps with the issue of how we're going to prioritize filling in these gaps. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Next up, we've got Scott Small.
Oh no, that's not good. Uh-oh. No animations. All right, sorry folks. We'll be creative. All right, hey everyone. I'm Scott Small, CTI Director at Tidal Cyber. We build software that helps implement threat-informed defense. And today I'm excited to share 3 kind of memes and 3 charts that summarize the state of attack mapping in the threat reporting space. I'll outline where we are now, why it matters, and some thoughts on how we can keep advancing. So what is the state of attack mapping in threat reporting? First meme is low-hanging fruit, but I really can't think of a better way to categorize it than calling it, look in the background, a pretty great success. I'm sorry, there's supposed to be animations here. I've been consistently processing a large pool of public CTI reports for several years, and what I've found is that across more than 3,000 reports since 2018, there's been a 6 times increase in the volume of reports that explicitly map to attack. What started with just a small handful of reports that I could find 5 years ago has now increased to nearly a quarter of all reports now. So far this year, we've collected over 400. When we think about attack's humble beginnings, this adoption of a common language across so many teams and organizations is, in my opinion, an undeniable success. So how does this help analysts and defenders? Meme number 2, you can just imagine it. It's supposed to say threat report review time is too damn high. I don't actually think that most reports are too long, but what we are seeing is that the time it takes to review many reports is growing considerably. I measured report length across 3 types of public sources since last January and found that reports are generally getting much longer. Yes, there's many good reasons for this. Many reports now are increasingly rich with detail. But with so many reports being published, 40 or 50 minutes just to review one is a big ask for many teams already low on bandwidth. To be crystal clear, I'm not suggesting that attack mapping is the end goal of a CTI team, but mappings can help orient report consumers to key elements of a report and maybe even start considering relevant mitigations, controls, detections, or validation tests, which all also increasingly map to the knowledge base. The growing rate of many mapped reports, almost every one in this data set had mappings, means these benefits can be realized more often. So I mainly wanted to spotlight this success story today, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for attack-aligned reports to deliver even more value. Let's review the types of mappings I see most often. First, at the top, quasi or maybe explicit report organization around attack tactics. In my opinion, still really helpful for orientation within an attack chain. Next, a classic, references to technique identifiers in a report's body. Some can be tricky to spot, like hyperlinks to the MITRE ATT&CK website, but a simple regex can easily find even these references within a report. And in the background, it's kind of cut off, but this is what I'd consider the current gold standard. We referenced several times already during the conference, a neat appendix table that even includes the incredibly valuable context of how each technique was used. Advisories from US and international authorities increasingly contain these RIP form of mappings, plus reports from several vendors, which I had highlighted here. But you might be asking, what's possibly better than a MITRE ATT&CK table? There's no widely adopted methodology for this right now, but I do believe it's possible to make attack map CTI outputs even more actionable through something like the mythical procedure object, which you're seeing here illustrated at the bottom. Yes, it's impossible to catalog every variation of every technique implementation, but more structure around behavioral observables is needed if we want to scale detection, hunt, and offensive teams' ability to ingest CTI. Projects like attack data sources, schema for analytics, tests, and flows, and the indicators of behavior project already support a move in this direction. Check out Northwestern Mutual's first con talk, Intel as Code, on YouTube for a great example from industry of how structured procedures can streamline CTI handoff to detection teams. Wherever you are on this expanding brain maturity spectrum for attack map CTI, the good news is there's more resources than ever to support you. So in closing, some of these include CISA's Attack Mapping Guide and Decider Tool, CTID's Attack Powered Suit, and now several solutions for AI-based TTP extraction, including TRAM, Microsoft's MITRE Map, Kelvin So's MITRE ATT&CK Procedural GPT project, and multiple commercial alternatives.
Right on time. Great, Jamie. We might actually make it through this year without cutting somebody off. So our final lightning talk speaker, get to the stage, Jeremy Straub.
Great, thanks very much. So I guess my name is Jeremy Straub. I'm the director of the Cybersecurity Institute at North Dakota State University. And what I'm going to be talking about today is a little bit different than what most of the other lightning talks have talked about so far. I'm going to be talking about some work that we've done implementing the attack model and a little bit of CKC as well, using something called the Blackboard architecture. Now, I'm going to spend a second or two telling you what the Blackboard architecture is, because I presume if I did everybody raise their hands that have heard of it, it would probably look about like what it is right now, maybe one or two hands going up. So the Blackboard architecture is a form of AI that's been around for a while. It builds on something called an expert system, or a rule fact expert system. Basically, the little diagram on this slide kind of explains what this is. Basically, you have different rules that if they are true or false or whatever condition you use to trigger them, they assert a fact that comes out of it. What the Blackboard architecture actually adds to this kind of basic expert system concept is the ability to actually take some sort of an action based upon this. The terminology that I'm using on this slide is the terminology that we've been using. There's a variety of implementations of the Blackboard architecture, and some of them use somewhat different terminology. I should mention before I move on that this was first implemented by Barbara Hayes Roth in the 1970s, late 1970s, but it's been actually updated pretty consistently since then. There's been research going on for this now for over 50 years, about 45 years. So anyway, that's what we're building upon here. And the basic gist of what we're doing is actually taking the chains of different things that can go wrong, have to go wrong, etc., in order for an attack by an adversary to be successful, and making them into a model that helps the system figure out whether those are actually things that might actually be going wrong in a particular instance, in a particular environment. And so what we have here on the screen is a very simplified example of this. And I should say, if we actually built one of these things out, we would need the entirety of the walls in here, probably plus some, to do it. They get very large and very complicated because, again, we're trying to map all the different things, all the different nuance to this. The beauty of this, of course, is that a lot of this can be automated, and typically as a human interacting with it, you would never deal with the whole thing at that level all at once. In fact, you probably would deal with something that maybe has a little bit more detail than this on it, basically showing how all the pieces fit together to actually make for a successful attack. And again, as we all know, if you can identify what's necessary for attack, you can identify what's necessary to potentially defend against it. The other thing that's neat about this is you can identify whether things are more prevalent in different types of attacks and see kind of what's going on. You know, is this particular node something that's showing up a lot in a lot of different models? So again, that's the basic kind of gist of what we're doing here. Again, another neat thing that kind of comes with this is the fact that you can actually implement a lot of granularity to this. So you can have a very detailed model, but you don't have to have a very detailed model. You can go all the way down to the individual systems, individual tactics and techniques from the attack model, and map those in. And then you can actually encapsulate those for presenting to people that maybe don't want quite that much level of detail, such as those people that might want something that maybe looks more like a heat map. And so you can imagine if we started to add some colorization to something that maybe is a little bit more detailed than what I have here on the screen, this could be something that shows people, okay, this is something that could go wrong. Maybe this is the likelihood of it going wrong. And again, imagine a little bit more detail. Imagine the ability to click here and zoom in and actually see what's behind it. And you begin to see the power of this. And the whole beauty of this is we're taking a technology that has been around for some time. It's relatively stable in terms of how it works. The beauty of the expert system and the Blackboard architecture is the fact that you can explain quite easily why something actually happens, unlike a lot of our newer forms of AI that we're hearing about, like large language models, where something goes wrong and you don't really know why, something goes right and you don't really know why. This is all very explainable AI. And so again, we can explain this is how the attack happened, or this is how an attack perhaps more correctly could happen. This is the different things that would have to go wrong to have it happen. And again, we can do this at the speed of a computer as opposed to the speed of a human analyst, with a lot of other ways to potentially automate this built in. And with that, I will actually end 23 seconds early.
Excellent. Nicely done. Thank you, Jeremy. And so if I get another round of applause for all of our lightning talk speakers today, it is not easy to do this. So we're going to switch gears for our last talk closing out ATT&CKcon 4. John Baker is the general manager of the Center for Threat Informed Defense. We know that many of the projects that his organization creates are widely used by the attack community, so we've invited him to join us here on the stage today to talk about what they've been up to. So please welcome John.
Thanks, Adam. Well, while the slides are coming up, oh, there we go. Thank you all for sticking in for the last talk of the day, last talk of the conference. I was really struck by the 10-year anniversary panel, and so I'll share. I've been at MITRE for 20 years. I never imagined that would happen when I started 20 years ago, right? I think throughout that time, what's kept me here is I've been able to surround myself with people that were smarter than me, where I could continue to learn from them, with them, and do things that hopefully mattered along the way. So I was thinking about that question that came up during the anniversary panel. How has attack affected your life? Right? I thought that was a pretty cool question. So I got to be alongside the attack team through a lot of the maturation and kind of explosive growth of attack. I was a department manager. We were reorganizing our cybersecurity organization here at MITRE, and Todd Whitbold, who the team mentioned, had hired me several years earlier. I worked in his group, and I looked at him as an advisor and a mentor. And he had suggested that as we did this reorg, I ought to take on the role leading what became MITRE's Cyber Threat Intel and Adversary Emulation Department. Well, that department had the good fortune of kind of housing or being the home for the attack team, the Caldera team, and what we eventually called adversary emulation. So in that time, I learned tremendously and grew tremendously in that role. But it also put me in a position where I got to meet with a lot of people here in this room and across the community that were sort of adopting and helping to advance attack. And along the way, that's where we kind of had the aha moment that there was something we needed to do to really try to scale threat-informed defense, to harness the power and energy that you all bring to attack and operationalizing attack to do even more, to try to have an even greater impact. And so that's a little bit of the attack impact on me kind of thing. I thought that was awesome to hear how it's affected the lives of the core sort of founders of attack, and figured I would share. This event today is also a sort of a soft anniversary for us at the Center for Threat Informed Defense. 4 years ago, we got started with the Center for Threat Informed Defense with a kickoff luncheon and an R&D workshop here at ATT&CKcon. At that point, we had 13 members working with us. They all took a big leap of faith, trusting MITRE, trusting myself and Rich Struess, my co-founder, that we could do something good that would help move the whole community along and help scale the work that MITRE was doing with the community on attack. Today, we have 36 member organizations from around the world that are very much committed to collaborative R&D in the public interest. We've now got this track record of coming together as a community, understanding gaps, challenges, opportunities, problems, and systematically evaluating them, and then developing solutions. When we develop a solution, our goal is to create something that will help improve the entire community. We want to create practical resources that you can use to improve your cyber defenses. I organized the research program around what I think of as the 3 core areas for threat-informed defense. I want to, a lot of the knowledge that we heard in talks today and yesterday, I want to capture that and use that and further research to make it much easier to operationalize the great threat intel products that are out there today and the knowledge that we have across this community. I want to make it much easier for teams to test and evaluate their defenses from the perspective of an adversary. We need to understand how our defenses stand up against the attacks or the TTPs that adversaries actually use. And it's got to be easier for us to do that. It can't just be the most elite teams have that sort of capability. And then, of course, the ultimate goal really is to improve our ability to defend against those threats. And so we need to be systematically improving our defensive capabilities as we go along, based on that knowledge of what adversaries do. So I won't go through all of the milestones over the course of the year here, but for this talk, I wanted to share with you a little bit of our progress this year. I'll hit a couple of my favorite projects, talk a little bit about what we're working on right now, and then a little bit further out what's coming up on the horizon. And then some of the things that we hope to do to really try to scale the community we have here today. So there's been a couple of references to this work over the course of the conference. I wanted to highlight Ocean Lotus Adversary Emulation Plan. It's our most recent project. And it also kind of goes back, for me, to the beginning of the Center for Threat Informed Defense. One of our first projects was a project that created a FIN6 adversary emulation plan. When we did that, we wanted to do it in a way that it wasn't just a one-off. We wanted to set ourselves up so that there would be a consistent look and feel to a collection of adversary emulation plans. And at that time, remember I had started out as that department manager running our adversary emulation work. But we had done a lot of work developing emulation plans for different government sponsors to support our internal research program, but they all kind of showed we were learning as we were going. They all had a different look and feel, and honestly, the barrier to entry was pretty high. So in publishing the Adversary Emulation Library, we wanted to give a consistent look and feel to all the emulation plans and kind of lay out for the community our perspective on what a good intelligence-driven emulation plan looked like. So fast forward to now, we have kind of partnered with the attack evaluations team so that every time we do another round of attack evals, a emulation plan is also added to the library. So now you have this corpus that's kind of building up, but it's always been focused on Windows and kind of traditional Windows enterprise environments. So Ocean Lotus is our first emulation plan that brings in Mac and Linux TTPs. So I'm excited about that. And I love the energy of some of the speakers earlier that are looking to do more in Linux, and I can't wait to work with them to do that. The other thing that's happened is we've learned along the way, and we're really trying to position those emulation plans to better support purple teaming. So if you look through the Ocean Lotus plan, you'll see a lot of notes and suggestions for defenders for the blue team to help them better use and benefit from that Ocean Lotus emulation plan. As I go here, all of our projects are up on our website. Often the technical resources are up in GitHub. It's all open and freely available. In Slack for this talk on the channel, I posted links to all the different projects that I'll mention here as we go along. So if you're curious, it's in the Slack channel. The next project I wanted to highlight, I'm also excited about this one because this is our first project out of the Center's research program where we're really trying to advance the state-of-the-art in detection engineering. So with summiting the pyramid, what we've tried to do is help all detection engineers benefit from the high-level expertise of really sophisticated detection engineers that are adept at writing robust detections. Right? I want to make it much easier for every detection engineer to write detections that are resilient and difficult for adversaries to evade. So because we're a research program, everything kind of starts with a problem. So you see this triple fairly frequently throughout our publications. What's the problem we're trying to solve? It's too easy for adversaries to avoid or sort of circumvent many common detections today. We found that in several of the open source repositories, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and capability that's mapped back to MITRE ATT&CK, and that's great. But when you look closely, we find that a lot of those detections end up linking to rather ephemeral items like file names or hashes. And it's great, we can understand now we have evidence of a behavior occurring, but that becomes really easy for an adversary to evade. And so what we did with summiting the pyramid was we put together a tool and a framework for evaluating a detection and helping you systematically kind of move it up that pyramid of pain, trying to make it more robust. Like a lot of research, as you go along, you learn, you have ideas for more, what you can do next or how you would have done it differently the next time. So with summiting, one of the things I love is we benefited from I think it was 6 different organizations very actively helping us shape and develop this project. And several of those have actually fielded capabilities in commercial products as a result of that research. And there's several security teams now that are actively using summiting to improve their detection capabilities. So it feels like a big win to know that we created a resource that shortly after it was published is integrated and is actually improving defenses. So that's a nice milestone for us and feels good, right? But what's awesome is that we now have a whole pile of ideas to take this and start to automate the summiting the pyramid methodology, to take it out to other platforms as we go. So with that, I'd say stay tuned for more with summiting the pyramid. Over the next few months, or 6 months or so, you'll start to see some significant updates there as well. So I wanted to share briefly a little bit about what we're doing right now. I won't have time to go through all of the projects, but I decided to list them here for you if you're curious. The one I thought was maybe most relevant given the talks that we've had this week here or over the last day and a half was the M3 TID project, sort of a mouthful. Measure, maximize, and mature threat-informed defense. We've seen countless presentations over the week here and over months, and you see blog posts all the time where organizations are talking about how they sort of measure and communicate around defensive posture against specific TTPs and attack. There's a ton of silos of knowledge and ideas and expertise out there, but to date, no one has really kind of brought that information and that knowledge and expertise all together in one place to help the whole community understand best practices for measuring and maturing your threat-informed defense. As an idea here, one of the common things I'd love to get us away from, you see heat maps that are driven by the number of detections for a given TTP. And I guess that's a way to measure, but that's not really an effective way to measure your coverage for that particular technique. I'd love to get the community beyond that. So, vendors and security teams never have to result to just counting detections as a way to say, I have great coverage or not for a given TTP. So if we're successful with M3 TID, you'll all have a resource and you'll be able to tell us how we got it wrong and how we can make it better to build upon to measure and mature your threat-informed defense. So jumping ahead here, we have a pretty healthy pipeline of projects. As I said, we're always bringing in new ideas. ATT&CKcon for me is an awesome venue because I hear all of your ideas, I hear about what you guys are doing, and it just kind of fuels this engine that we run within the Center for Threat-Informed Defense, where we take those ideas in and we systematically evaluate them. And some of those turn into projects, and then sometime later they turn into resources that we publish for the whole community. So I wanted to spend a minute just sharing a little bit of my vision or our vision for attack flow. So we built attack flow as a data model for representing a sequence of adversary behaviors. So my goal with attack flow was to basically say, yes, you should absolutely measure your defensive posture against the attack matrix. That's great, but it's also important to start to think about how adversaries actually use sequences of behaviors in an attack. And when we think about defensive posture, we should be thinking about how we defend against that sequence of behaviors in an attack. And so we have a data model now with a sort of web application builder that allows you to build attack flows and some tools to allow you to visualize flows. Ultimately, if you kind of think back to that threat-informed defense triangle that I had up there earlier, throughout that cycle, I want to see attack flow create a much more robust dialogue so that an incident response team can document an attack and share an attack flow with an intel team. And that intel team can include in their reporting an attack flow that perhaps an adversary emulation team or a SOC team can use to evaluate their defenses and develop more robust analytics. So I'm trying to create that ecosystem based on understanding that sequence of adversary behaviors. We're getting ready to launch a project in the center that I'm really excited about this because it is a way of kind of giving you a sense of the sort of energy among center participants. We have 10 organizations. So a third of our center members have all said, this is something that we're excited about and is important to us. They're going to come together and work with us on a project that aims to collect and analyze sets of flows. Sort of the research hypothesis for this project is that we can take a set of flows and we can use that corpus to help us predict what the next technique might be in threat hunting. So if you have 2 or 3 techniques and you have a whole corpus of what adversaries have done in the past, I want to see if you can use that to then say, all right, based on those 3 techniques, what might I see next? Or based on those 3 techniques, what most likely happened before that? I want to bring some automation there. And in my mind, this is a way that we can start to help advance all threat hunting teams by creating this and publishing this as an open resource that anybody can take and use. It's a research project, so there's risk. It's not certain that we'll succeed, but I'm fairly optimistic that with the folks that we're working together with in the center, we'll be able to create an impactful resource there. The other thing I wanted to say is just as we move forward here with the center's research program, kind of looking further out on the horizon, together with you and our center members, I think that we've built a platform for trying to advance threat-informed defense for the whole community. And so what really guides us is that core mission. We're a research organization. So we want to continue to do research into new and emerging areas. We're looking into standing up a whole focus area on secure AI, leveraging the knowledge and experience we have within the attack community to help us understand threats against AI systems and use that knowledge to red team AI systems, to develop mitigations to protect those AI systems, as an example. We have work going right now building a library of insider threat TTPs. There's an opportunity for us to sort of expand on that knowledge for the whole community and create a community resource there that helps us not just understand the TTPs, but how do we emulate and defend against and mitigate those TTPs. So as we go forward, I see a ton of opportunity for us working with you and our center participants to advance threat-informed defense. And everything that we do, we're really trying to take that threat-informed perspective and apply it to these different areas. I said earlier, what motivates me and has kept me going through my time at MITRE is this focus on impact. It's incredibly rewarding to me and my team. I hear several of them like stopping by and letting me know, like, that was so cool. We just saw how, you know, that team is using top attack techniques for threat hunting. Those sorts of things are incredibly motivating and rewarding, and it's honestly what drives a lot of our center participants in continuing to support the research. So we need to continue to publish foundational resources. When we're doing well, we enable innovation across industry. When I look at our published work, I think we have 28 published projects today. There's absolutely an opportunity to make that work a lot more accessible. Today, honestly, the barrier to entry for many of our projects is higher than it should be. We need to improve that. And so I want to work with you to collect your feedback to understand how is it hard to use these things, what doesn't work, what works really well, so we can continue to improve those resources. To really succeed and scale threat-informed defense globally, we need to build a global community. Obviously, this event has people here in person from around the world. I'm incredibly impressed by some of the folks that traveled from Singapore and, you know, basically the opposite side of the world to come join us. It's awesome. I love the dedication. But we need to create venues like this where practitioners can get together in other regions and share knowledge and help advance the threat-informed defense community together. So for the last several years, I've partnered up with Freddie de Jure and the Cybersecurity Center in Belgium to run the EU Attack Community Workshop. So that's coming up again. We have the dates held for late May in 2024. In between now and then, I'm trying to build an Asia-Pacific flavor of that attack community workshop. So think short micro talks coming together, non-pitch kind of style, but practitioners sharing their knowledge with each other with an effort to build community in that area and continue to advance threat-informed defense. I would just put a shameless plug. If you are interested in helping to build out that Asia-Pacific community, I absolutely need help. I've been working to kind of network and establish connections in the region that would be interested in speaking, would be interested in joining, would be interested in recruiting people to kind of build out the community. So feel free to reach out. Please do. So I said earlier that one of the challenges we had was trying to figure out how to really scale the work that we do around attack and in threat-informed defense. When I was that department manager, frankly, that was a lot of my job. The team was awesome, obviously, and I felt like I was in a position needing to try to advocate for resources and try to figure out how do we scale this thing? How do I help support the team grow attack and have the impact that it's had to date? That was one of our core goals, as I said, in creating the Center for Threat-Informed Defense. So today, we have the center and all of our participants that come together and are incredibly invested in the research. They fund the research, they drive the research that we do, all with an eye or a goal of advancing the whole community. We have our first couple of benefactors at Ecolvio and Coalfire that helped us shape this benefactor program that Adam spoke about earlier, where basically benefactors can come together and help us scale by financially supporting the research. So if we want to do more attack, we can have more resources to do that. Right? And then lastly, community. Venues like this, people sharing on social media, writing blogs, taking the time to talk about their experiences, their successes, their failures, is incredibly important to us. It helps drive the research program in the center. It helps evolve and mature the attack corpus. Your input is really critical to continuing to drive and advance threat-informed defense. So please share your use cases. It's just an anecdote that I thought I would share. Somebody recently wrote a blog about how they use Top Attack Technique Calculator, one of the center's research projects. And it was awesome. He kind of walked through step by step what it was and how he uses it for a couple of different use cases. But the simple fact that he took it and took the time to write it down and share, it allowed us to then kind of share that for the world. And now I think, I don't know, many tens of thousands of people have seen the blog and now understand that resource is there. So it goes from a resource that we created within the center to a resource that's now widely known and hopefully widely used, so it can have an impact. So we all play a huge role in advancing threat-informed defense. So with a couple minutes to go, I just would kind of ask you all to join us and really continue to do what you're doing. You're here today, so that's a good sign right there. And change the game on the adversary. Keep in mind, we all play a really critical role in advancing threat-informed defense. Attack wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for this community. I think one of the panel questions was, what enabled attack to succeed? And I think one of the answers from the panelists was the community contributing to it and keeping it alive and keeping it moving forward as adversaries evolve. Well, that's critical to really advance the whole threat-informed defense community. So with that, I have a couple minutes left for questions. I love questions.
First off, thank you, not only for the excellent talk, but also helping us cultivate this ecosystem where you can connect to the community.
It's incredibly rewarding.
I do have a question in my back pocket, but want to hear, speaking of community, if there was anything from the audience. We can circle back later. On that big topic of community, just wanted to hear your thoughts on what are the best touch points? I know you have a page on highlighting work and maybe GitHub repositories and email alias. How does the community really kind of reach the center?
Yeah, actually I'm kind of psyched about this. We just created a Slack channel on the attack Slack. So if you ever post there, you're ever wondering if you're on the MITRE attack Slack, we're watching, we'll check in there. But you can always just email if that's easiest for you, or posting on LinkedIn and that sort of stuff, we see it. So email at CTID is probably best. It's something that I really want to, as we go to build community, we're looking into creating just a dedicated CTID Slack, so maybe that'll come out in a little bit here as well.
Oh, awesome. And then regarding like historical work, would you direct people to the website, the GitHub? Yes.
Oh yeah, if you go to our website, there's our work page. If you go to the our work page, you can kind of scroll through. All of our publications are up there and available. In honesty, it's like a thin marketing site that'll link you to our GitHub repo or some product documentation on whatever that resource is. But it's all up there on the our work page.
Yeah, excellent. And then regarding like future, you highlighted some really excellent ideas regarding research. Say there's an idea out there. Someone mentioned this global community. what kind of ideas are you looking for? I think you mentioned some of the usability of attack or extensions of attack or applications. What kind of ideas are you looking for, and what's the best way to engage? Is it that Slack, the email?
Well, first of all, he's not here. He had to fly back to the West Coast, but I'll steal something from Sunil Sundar. Sunil's our director of R&D, and he's been really trying to embrace this idea that no idea is a bad idea. I think I see some smiles there. They saw it up on a slide earlier. All ideas are good ideas. Good ideas are great, I think is the way that the triple goes. But there's a sort of a double meaning to no idea is a bad idea. So we want ideas. Not having ideas is a bad thing. So we love ideas. People reach out all the time. Send us an email at ctit@miteringenuity.org. If you have an idea, or catch me. I talk to people at conferences and venues like this all the time, and I learn from you, and it inspires us, and hopefully it turns into some other useful project.
Excellent. Small token of appreciation, but thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jamie.